I was here in 2011. That was a serious moment in the country, certainly in Tel Aviv, where every patch of open grass seemingly had a tent on it that summer. It was no joke, but it feels worse economically today in the country in 2022, I think, than it did in 2011. How do you compare, now and then?
Well, the protest now is not yet a mass protest. We'll have to see if it becomes one. Back then, it certainly became one. Part of what enabled that is the successful plan of the organizers to have it be not political. So you had people from all over the political spectrum. And also, Israel was less polarized back then, and it was, as was the world, really. Yeah. And it was possible to do such a thing. Also, it seemed a little bit, I have to say, less dire, the circumstances back then. They were talking about the price of cottage cheese as a big symbol.
Right, that was the impetus, cottage cheese, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and cottage cheese in Israel by the exchange rate back then was more expensive than most places in Europe. I believe the comparison was Berlin. Right now, we have a truly dire situation. Housing prices since 2011 have doubled. Housing prices in Israel for the past 20 years have tripled. That's equivalent only to some world-beating housing bubbles like the city of London, like metropolitan London.
Awful.
So that's obviously very, very bad. But I think with maturity comes the understanding that political choices have consequences. A lot of the cost of living in Israel comes from political choices that result from people's votes. Young people in Israel tend to vote less frequently than some of the older people. The older people own the housing stock. Part of the calculation here is that Israel has one of the highest ownership rates of property in the OECD, in the developed world. What that means is when the government doesn't free up new land for construction, when the government doesn't zone land for residential housing, when the government doesn't subsidize public housing, enables the cost of housing to go up, and with it, the cost of rentals to go up, most people are happy because they own land and their net worth goes up.
Yeah.
The proportion of people who find themselves outside the housing bubble is obviously much smaller. It's young people. Young people tend not to vote.
This government's paralyzed right now. I mean, they don't have a majority. What meaningful reforms could they come up with?
I got to say, the government lack of a majority right now means that they can't legislate very easily. And it could be argued that Israel, like most countries, may have enough laws. I think the government can do a lot of different things by governing as a government without worrying too much about the legislature. Not every government policy has to pass in a legislature. And also, by the way, the art of legislating means that sometimes you have to give and take with opposition parties or parties that are in the middle to get things passed. It's not easy. It's obviously
not in this environment.
It's not in the world.
What you're saying is sensical, but not this Knesset. This parliament hasn't displayed even the inkling to be able to do those things.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if the parliament disbands. That could happen as early as Wednesday, as I'm sure you know.
Yes. Dan Perry, you're previewing a topic for us coming up here as well, but I appreciate your perspective on this. It's just to see tents on Rothschild, it's a charged thing. It's a charged symbol, and I think they know it, obviously.
Well, back in 2011, it was a bit of a festival in the Woodstock atmosphere, I have to say. I don't know if it'll be the same today in a polarized atmosphere.
It was. Great perspective on that. Good points all around. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. Dan Perry, thanks for being with us.